Oh, yeah. We finished. It's time for a bit of Cold War. We've done the hard work. Have you seen my TikToks, Hipster Historian? Mate, you should be watching that. I've made some good predictions, some great predictions. It's looking good, Brev. It's looking good. However, you know what I'm going to do today for Cold War? I just had this original idea. It just came to me. Why not revise your course with regard to the big four Soviet leaders? Obviously, you know who they are. You know, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Gorbachev, yeah. Okay, so those are your big four leaders. There are obviously other Soviet leaders like Chernenko and Andropov. Obviously, you know them. So, but you know they're not alive for very long. So, you can broadly look at this course and really retain, I'd say, about 90% of the knowledge you need for your course to pass your GCSE exam. And that's where we want to be, don't we? We want to be in that passing position. You want to, when in 15, 20 years, when you're down the pub or wherever you are, and there's a quiz. And you'd be like, yeah, I passed my history GCSE. I know that answer. Do you know what I mean? That's where you want to be. So, or even better, do an A-level with me. But anyway, let's stop prevaricating. Let's not split hairs because I don't have any. Let's get on with it. So, Stalin, 1940. In terms of the course, he was in charge from 1928. But each leader has a different ethos. Now, Stalin literally called himself that. He wasn't born Stalin. He was born Joseph Shugavelli, and his nickname was Koba. But instead, he called himself Stalin. The man of steel, yeah. Okay, so he was a very tough Soviet dictator. And actually, if you look at the course date there, 1941, he was in charge of the Soviet Union between 1941 and 1945. In the Soviet Union, they call that the Great Patriotic War. You're looking at the man who defeated Adolf Hitler, okay? Dictator to dictator. That mighty Red Army. When the bombs were rained down on Stalingrad, did Stalin say, oh, you know what, let's have a peace resolution? No. When they had to cross that Dnieper River, did Stalin say, oh, allow it, Hitler? No. Okay? He got his troops to cross it. So basically, he's victorious in World War II. And that sets the scene for the whole course. So the Allied powers, a grand alliance of Britain, the Soviet Union, and America, they basically sit around a table at 3 different conferences after World War II. And they decide what the new world order is going to be. So if you look at this first president that he works with, it's FDR. Hey, man, it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt is a good guy. Why is he a good guy? Because he's a consensus maker. He actually gives in to a lot of Stalin's demands, or is willing to work with him with those demands at Tehran and Yalta. However, very, very sadly, very sad, he dies. And he's replaced by Harry S. Truman. That's Truman. So, yes, Harry S. Truman replaces him. Now, Truman is in charge of the Potsdam Conference. You know what's really interesting for some deeper research? If you just write Harry S. Truman, Potsdam Conference, he's got a video where he's speaking about this. There's a really good YouTube channel. It's called the Harry S. Truman channel. And it's just videos of him speaking about his relationships with Stalin and various other bits of history as he was a US president. It's really interesting. I'll definitely give that a watch. Anyway, he's a lot more anti-communism. When he comes to power, he says, we've got to stop babying the Soviets. He elects to use the atomic bomb in Japan to kind of flex his muscles and show the Soviets, who's ahead in the arms race there. So he's a major character, and he really has a policy called containment. Now, in his policy of containment, I'd say it's made of twin pillars. And the pillars of containment really are the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. And they're kind of effectively the same. It's like throwing around the money, throwing around his dollars and supporting countries which are at risk of falling to communism and propping up kind of right-wing kind of nationalist movements there as a vanguard against the communist domino theory from coming to reality. So he's also has a big rift with Stalin in the Berlin airlift. Stalin wants Germany to be a really poor and broken down country. Truman wants to build Germany back up. And you have the Berlin airlift from 1948 to 1949 as a consequence. And then we have NATO, which is formed, which is an anti-Soviet and anti-Soviet Union alliance, which still exists to this day. So how's that for a bit of continuity? Now, the major flashpoints are the Berlin blockade and airlift, 1948 to 1949, and also the arms race. So first lighting was detonated by Stalin, well, not personally, but by Soviet scientists in 1949. And so what happens is that the America and the Soviet Union kind of reach a parity in the arms race, that they both have atomic bombs, but America has far more of them. The Soviet Union will be playing catch up for a large amount of time. Now, Stalin, I'd say, had reactive policies. He created Comecon because Truman created the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. He also created Cominform to keep the Soviet bloc tightly under his control and make sure that those communist governments were basically Stalinist and puppet leaders in Eastern Europe. And he also rallied against dollar imperialism. Okay, so he said what Truman was doing in Western Europe by investing in those economies was dollar imperialism. So he was quite hostile to that. Now, major events which he was in power during, so he led the USSR to victory, Tehran Conference, Yalta Conference, Potsdam Conference. There's something which I should have put on here as well, and it's the Iron Curtain speech by Winston Churchill. So that should go at 1946. And Stalin also made a reactive speech that in Pravda, where Stalin said that Churchill was an Anglo-Saxon supremacist, racist supremacist. And yeah, the expansion into the Soviet bloc was very important from 1945 to 1949. So countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia for a little while. There's a few more, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But importantly, the Eastern Bloc came under a tight sphere of influence, maybe an iron fist under Stalin. So that's how I would revise this part of the course. Now, moving on to our second Soviet premier. It's crucial that you remember him. It's Khrushchev. Now, for me, while Stalin was a man of steel, Khrushchev is a bit of like a hot-tempered. He's a bit erratic. He kind of doesn't think things through. He kind of contradicts himself. He's an important person to remember because he's in charge during the most critical part of the Cold War, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Berlin Crisis. So the presidents that he worked with were Eisenhower. Now, Eisenhower was very different to Khrushchev. Khrushchev seemed to want to continually escalate the Cold War. Eisenhower seemed to be a bit more pliable and seemed to want to back down. Eisenhower had been a general during World War II and seen a lot of American young boys meet their deaths. Whilst Khrushchev was also a commissar, a political commissar for the Red Army, and he was at Stalingrad and key parts of World War II. He seemed to have more of a thirst for aggression. And whether this was just posturing or whether it was generous, he did say things like, "We will bury you," during the Hungarian uprising and the Suez Crisis in 1956. Now, Eisenhower was replaced briefly, well, for 3 years, the beginning of 1961 to the end of 1963, by JFK. Okay, and JFK is very famous for his "Ich bin ein Berliner," speech, where he goes to Berlin and says to Berliners, it's the proudest boast in the world to say that you're from Berlin. And he's an American saying that. So he's really saying that freedom and Berlin are intertwined. So they're the two presidents that he has to deal with. Now, what's interesting is that he opts for a policy of de-Stalinization. And with this policy of de-Stalinization, Hungary really quickly reacts to this. So de-Stalinization is really given greater freedoms. It's almost like Gorbachev's new thinking before Gorbachev's new thinking. Certainly there are parallels that we can draw here. He wants a kind of more relaxed Soviet Union. Like, why does everything have to be so oppressive, and why do so many people have to disappear? Why do you have to be so confrontational? It doesn't last, however. And one of the reasons I think it doesn't last is because of the Hungarian uprising. The Hungarians were no fans of the Soviets. They'd fought alongside Hitler in the Great Patriotic War, what you know as World War II. So the Hungarian uprising is a challenge towards Khrushchev, but Khrushchev quickly dominates the country, sends the tanks in and crushes that uprising there. Remember, this is just a quick revision run-through of these events. So if you really want to look at these in more detail, then I would suggest that you have a little cheeky Google. Okay, also you've got the Berlin Crisis, where you have a tank off in Berlin, checkpoint Charlie, and this was because of Khrushchev's desire to give an ultimatum. So he gives a Berlin ultimatum in 1958, and he basically says to the Western powers, you have 6 months to get out of Berlin. Now, really, he's saying this is because Berlin was 100 miles into East Germany, which was under Soviet control. So you had this little democratic enclave where there's loads of Western spies. It just made everything very, very tense. However, the single biggest event, really, with regard to flashpoints and policies or anything, is the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the fact that the Soviets wanted parity with the USSR was a major driving force in history. Now, the Americans had nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles in Italy and Turkey, which could have dealt a terrible first blow to the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union quickly put nuclear missiles in Cuba when Fidel Castro had his revolution, and it was after the Bay of Pigs invasion or attempted invasion. So they put missiles there. It created 13 days during October, from the 16th to the 29th of October. It created a massive, well, it could have been a global catastrophe. It could have been World War III. However, due to RFK and a ambassador that was in America at the time, they were able to resolve their issues quickly. As a consequence, the hotline was set up. So if you look at the events, there's a lot that happens under Khrushchev: the Warsaw Pact, the Hungarian Uprising, the Cuban Revolution, the summits. There's a lot of summits between Eisenhower and then eventually JFK. So the Vienna summit in 1961 was incredibly important. The hotline was set up as a consequence of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which meant there was more effective communication between the two. And then you start to see, after Kennedy's visit to Berlin, which was maybe a bit hostile, in 1963, we see a test ban treaty. Now, that's quite interesting. So quite quickly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, there seems to be a pragmatic decision by the USA and the USSR in their superpower relationship to trying to accommodate a more peaceful viewpoint, a more collaborative viewpoint, and that's how Dayton comes along. Now, speaking of Dayton, let's move on. We've got Brezhnev, Comrade Eyebrows, as I call him. So, there he is. There's our guy. So, Brezhnev. Now, Brezhnev is a different kind of leader to Khrushchev. He replaced Khrushchev because Khrushchev was a bit more dictatorial. Brezhnev works with a series of different presidents: Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan. There's a lot of people there. I don't expect you to remember maybe all of them, but the important thing that he did do was Dayton. I think Dayton is really one of the most important things that he kind of works with the Americans on. Now, with regard to flashpoints, the Prague Spring in 1968 didn't go down very well. Now, Dubček, who was the leader of Czechoslovakia, he again tried to, we could say it's a Gorbachev's new thinking before Gorbachev's new thinking. He wanted to relax communist rule. Dubček said he wanted socialism with a human face. However, most people like to live under a capitalist system. They prefer choice, democracy, and creature comforts. So the Czechoslovakian people started to campaign against the system, which they had peaceful protests, and other Warsaw Pact countries got concerned, and Brezhnev sent his tanks in to destroy that in 1968. Don't confuse that with the Hungarian Uprising. The Hungarian Uprising was violent. The Prague Spring was a peaceful process. People did die, okay, like about 200, but it wasn't a war. It wasn't a battle, okay. It was a peaceful hippie-style protest movement. Hey, man, it was the 1960s. The Beatles were around. Okay, now, another massive flashpoint was the invasion of Afghanistan. It is a turning point in history. Please make sure, if you ever write about the invasion of Afghanistan, it's a turning point. And why is it a turning point in history? It's because of Dayton. Now, Dayton really, I'd say it's from 1969 to 1979. You can see the beginnings of it in the previous slide in 1963 under Khrushchev. However, SALT 1 is signed in 1972. It's an agreement from both sides, the Soviet Union and America, to basically strategically limit their arms. So their strategic arms limitation talks. Another one is signed in 1979. It's never ratified by Jimmy Carter because of the invasion of Afghanistan. But the high point of this whole Dayton business is the Helsinki Accords in 1975. The Helsinki Accords really agree to the eastern borders of the Soviet bloc to be immutable, and that those countries would remain in a communist system. It was also a promise that all future problems would be sorted out diplomatically rather than by force. So the big events were the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, the 1968 Non-Proliferation Treaty. So these things are important to remember because you can see Dayton is really starting earlier than most people give it credit for. Most historians say, oh, it's 1969 to 1979. But again, look, 1967, 1968. You've got 3 treaties there. Okay, you've got the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, SALT 1, Helsinki Accords, SALT 2. You've got the invasion of Afghanistan, the Moscow Olympics in 1980, and Reagan is elected. Now, look, Reagan's election is as a consequence of the invasion of Afghanistan. It turns American opinion against the Soviet Union, and Reagan comes to power with an electoral promise to be tough on the Soviets. So let's look on our final slide, because I was supposed to do this in 20 minutes, but I think I've gone over. Where's my Gorbachev? Did I not do Gorbachev? No. All right, I didn't. That was a waste of time. Okay, right. I think I'll just end the video there and edit that no out, and I'll add Gorbachev in later. I thought I'd done it. That's why.